Okay, right now we are looking at why do people commit crime as kind of part of our introduction into forensic psychology. And it's a really fascinating subject. There's lots of theories about why people commit crimes, and I want to say up front, I'm not trying to tell you that any one of these theories is like totally correct. There may be parts of each one of them are correct. I'm not going to tell you that these are all the different theories about why people commit crimes. There's definitely some other ones. I'm just giving you a nice little introductory into them, so that way you kind of have an understanding of it, and maybe this interests you and you end up delving further into it. Certainly, if you studied criminology in college or a forensics type course, you would certainly find more in depth and situations and theories and explanations for crime. But these are just a couple of major ones that kind of float out there in society. Now, you should have a sheet that looks like this. You would have printed this, or you can download it and save it as a PDF and open it in Cami in order to edit it for me. Or I might have given it to you in class, and therefore you've got it to use in class. Okay, so this is we're going to start with the most common theory about. Or maybe I should say the simplest theory about why crime happens, and that is just the idea of rational choice. That crime happens due to rational choice. And the idea behind this is that people act in their own self interest and they make decisions about committing a crime after weighing the potential for risks against reward. So, self interest is the reason people commit crime, and they weigh the potential risks and rewards, and then therefore they say, hey, you know what I'm saying? Like, the chance of me getting caught is low, but the reward is that you get to steal a shirt, therefore I'll do it. Um, of course, one of the problems with this theory is that a lot of people who commit crime, do it like suddenly, like it's just like a whim, like they don't really think it out actually at all. And then the other thing is that a lot of people who think about it would never do it because they have been taught like right from wrong, and they have morals that would never allow them to commit a crime. So there's other things happening with this theory that maybe misses out on some things. But it's kind of a simple idea, rational choice, self interest. Yeah, I mean, if I steal this, this is good. I'll do it. All right. So there's that. All right, second one, and this is the second one of the two we're going to look at in this particular lesson, is called the social disorganizational theory. It's a lot more in depth than the last one that we're looking at least in terms of how I'm going to teach it. And it's really, really an interesting theory. It's the idea behind social disorganization is about where you live and a person's physical and social environments. So where you grow up, do you grow up in a community that's clean and that looks nice? Do you have a social environment that's like, organized toward like education and community? Or do you grow up in a place that's just total chaos? All right. And those things, this theory goes, is primarily responsible for the behavioral choices that you make. So you are influenced behaviorally to make choices based on the environment in which you live. Okay, so that's the idea, and you can see the picture above my head here of just like rundown houses that are all just destroyed and trash everywhere. Those sort of things make a difference in terms of behavioral choices that you'll make. Let's look at this a little bit more in depth, though. All right, so Clifford Shaw and Henry McKay are a couple sociologists and criminologists who come up with this idea. It's way back in 1942, and they're really looking at urban areas in the United States and why crime happens in these areas. So Clifford Shaw and Henry McKay. And so what they find is that areas with high crime had a lot of same similarities, whether they were in Chicago or New York or Detroit or whatever major city you want to talk about. They had similarities. Let's look at those similarities. One, it had a high population turnover. People come in, people leave. People come in, people leave. They had high poverty rates. Like people were poor. Like there were a lot of people who were poor. So high crime areas had a lot of people coming in, moving out. They had high poverty rates. They also had a lot more social isolation. Like people didn't know their neighbors. They didn't know who anybody was around them. And so they had very few connections. They might not have had a church they went to or some social group they were part of or strong connections to people at a school or some other community organization. And so just not a lot of connections, a lot of isolation. Family disruption is a huge part of this as well. And what we found is, that they found in that areas where that had a high crime rate had a lot of fatherlessness. So very few men living in homes as part of a family. By the way, I'm just going to take an aside to that. That is still a major factor in a lot of crime today, and problems in society. Matter of fact, let's look at some statistics here. Go to the far left side here, and you can see here this is about based on census data about the father absence in America. If you live in a home without a father, 4 times greater risk of poverty, more likely to have behavioral problems when in school, 2 times greater risk of infant mortality, more likely to go to prison. Sometimes that's up to 4 or 5 times a lot higher likelihood of going to prison. More likely to commit gun crime. 7 times more likely to be pregnant as a teen on the girl side. More likely to face abuse and neglect, not necessarily from the mother, but from live-in boyfriends or whatnot. More likely to abuse in drugs and alcohol. 2 times more likely to be obese, and 2 times more likely to drop out of high school. So fatherlessness is not just associated with higher crime rates, although it is, but also associated with a slew of negative consequences. You can see that the percent of people who are living in a married family and a family with married parents has gone down. In 1968, 85% of children grew up in a family with married parents, and that's down to 65% as of 2017. But you can see if we break it down by ethnicity, it's much higher based on different groups. So if you go down, so lower one where it says nearly half of Black children live with solo mom, you could see that like in Black children, only 36% have married parents, whereas Hispanics is 62, whites 74, almost 75%, and then Asians have the highest rate of married parents, 85. Now, you should note that crime rates literally go according to in those groups according to ethnicity, and the higher the rate of married parents, the lower the crime rate. So in America, the least likely person to commit a crime is someone who's Asian. Also, the least likely to be a victim of crime is Asian. And the reason for that is that most crime happens within a race. White people commit crime against white people mostly, Hispanic people against Hispanics, Asians against Asians, Black against Black. So if you go to the right, you can see about young African Americans are far more likely to be victims of gun homicide than other young groups, than other races, and it's way higher. It's a much higher rate for African Americans, and that's mostly among African American men, by the way, not girls. But that kind of goes along with these other statistics here, and you can see Asians have the least likely to die of a gun crime because Asians are also the least likely to be involved in crime and have the highest married rates. They also have the highest in our country in America. Asians also have the highest rates of college degrees and the highest incomes of any groups in America as well. So there's a whole lot of things here playing together here that not only have to do with crime, but also have to do with education as well. Um, in areas that are poor, you also tend to see weaker schools. This is a problem. Home rates are weaker, so therefore the taxes that are collected to pay for schools through taxes on houses are less. And usually states send more money to poor districts because to make sure it's a little more fair in terms of what they can pay teachers and whatnot. But weak schools are a real problem. Chaotic schools, real problem in poor areas, and therefore crime is higher in those areas. And then there's less religious influence in areas that have high crime. Now, the theory behind all of this that Shaw and McKay say is this: what you see is that when you have all these different things happening, the population turnover, the poverty rates, less isolation, there's fatherlessness, there's weak schools, there's less religious influence. This leads to less regulation of youth behavior. And what does that really mean? That means less supervision of youth. It means, and when we're really talking, we're talking about boys mostly. We're talking because most violent crime happens among boys, and 95% of violent crime happens among men and young men. And so when there's less regulation of youth behavior, this leads to criminal traditions developing in an area. And the theory is that this gets passed down to younger generations. So, boys that are 8 or 9, 10 years old, they learn from the boys that are like 15 or 16. They learn from the boys who are like 20. And then this kind of creates, criminal traditions, if you will, that get passed down. And all these different problems up ahead lead to more crime. Okay, that's the first lesson on theories of crime. Again, not saying that this was like all the reason that crime happens, but it's one theory about why crime happens. Thanks. Take your practice.